On Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Just a week ago, our next guest was a federal prisoner serving a 19-year sentence for eco-terrorism in what his supporters say was a case of FBI entrapment. Today, he's a free man. In 2007, Eric McDavid was convicted of conspiring to bomb sites in California, including the Nimbus Dam. But his attorneys say he was entrapped by a teenage informant who went by the name Anna and supplied him with food, housing, and bomb-making instructions and pressured him into illegal activity. Two others arrested in the plot testified against McDavid in a deal that led to lighter sentences.
For them. Well, as part of a settlement reached in the case on Thursday, federal prosecutors acknowledged withholding evidence in McDavid's case, including an FBI request for the informant to undergo a lie detector test. This damning detail about the government's star witness was found in thousands of documents released after his trial, when his supporters filed a Freedom of Information Act request. During a hearing, federal judge Morrison England demanded to know how the prosecution failed to give potentially exculpatory evidence to the defense, saying, quote, "This is huge. This is something that needs to be dealt with," the judge said. McDavid pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge with a maximum 5-year sentence. He'd already served 9 years in prison, and he was released. Eric McDavid now joins us from Sacramento for his first interview since his release. With him, his partner, Jenny Esquivel, a member of the group Sacramento Prisoner Support. And in San Francisco, we're joined by Ben Rosenfeld, McDavid's lawyer. He's a civil rights attorney who specializes in cases dealing with police and FBI misconduct. He's also an advisory board member of the Civil Liberties Defense Center. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! Eric, let's begin with you. How does it feel to be free?
There is no definition to that. There's no way to express that with I don't think any language, definitely not the English language.
Explain
but it's definitely
what it
beautiful
is.
to be with my family.
Explain how critical the information was that had you released.
I think that's pretty obvious, and to tell you the truth, I think Ben could address that with a lot more clarity.
Okay, Ben Rosenfeld in San Francisco, can you talk about what has taken place in this case? I mean, here you have Eric McDavid, who is supposed to serve 19 years in prison. He's being released a decade early. Why?
11 years early, actually, and this was about as egregious a case of entrapment as I've seen in my entire legal career. And I should point out, too, that what they've done to Eric, they visit 1,000-fold on Muslims in this country. So it's very important that we raise public awareness about this. But in Eric's case in particular, a number of FOIA documents were turned over after the case was long concluded, and supporters started going through those documents, and they went, aha, this is stuff that should have been turned over to the defense that would have been absolutely critical to his defense. It included evidence that the government had called urgently for a lie detector examination of their informant and then inexplicably canceled it. There were indications that letters of a romantic nature that they had withheld from the defense were included in their files. But even the FOIA was the tip of the iceberg because it pointed to or hinted at some of those documents but didn't include them. And as his lawyers, we incorporated that into his habeas claim, and the court showed interest in that. And ultimately, that set the table for his release when the government was forced to admit that they had, in fact, withheld documents that should have been turned over to the defense.
Ben Rosenfeld, the informant in this case is a critical part of what happened here. In 2008, Elle magazine featured an article about how the FBI paid a young woman known as Anna to befriend activists and pressure them into illegal activity. It describes in detail her relationship with Eric McDavid and her role in the case against him. In an interview for the piece, Anna says when the group planned to blow up the Nimbus Dam, her role was to track down bomb recipes. She said, quote, "I go to the FBI with this, and they said, well, of course, we're not going to give you bomb recipes that actually work. So they gave me about half a dozen recipes that were all missing components." Could you talk about the role of Anna, because she supposedly was involved in gathering evidence as an informant against many activists in the environmental movement?
Well, thank you. I want to point out first, there was never any plan to blow up the Nimbus Dam. There was actually never any plan to do anything. There was a lot of talk, and whatever plans there were 100% the FBI's and Anna's. I mean, this is a clear-cut case of entrapment. It's a case of the government creating and then solving its own so-called conspiracy. The Nimbus Dam, if there was any agreement among the co-defendants in this case, it was specifically not to blow up the Nimbus Dam. But yes, Anna entrapped them by literally herding them together from around the country, by plying them with the material they needed, by sheltering them and providing them food and transportation, and literally gathering them back together and trying to keep them interested in her plans, in her schemes. And each of them, for their own reasons, was trying to please and placate her. It was a lot of talk. It was no action. Nothing was ever done. Nothing was ever agreed upon. Certainly nothing was ever blown up.
So if you could talk about the case, Jenny, why you got involved with Sacramento Prisoner Support, Jenny Esquivel, and how you applied for this information under the Freedom of Information Act.
Sure. I came to Sacramento immediately after Eric was arrested. He and I were partners right before he got arrested. And so I came here just to be closer to him and do support work for him. And that's how I originally got involved in Sacramento Prisoner Support. As far as the FOIA goes, you know, Mark Reichel, Eric's original attorney for trial, filed a FOIA request before Eric's trial in 2007. And at the time, the FBI responded saying that they had no records responsive to our request, which was interesting. Also, clearly, it was a lie, as at that time we had thousands of pages of discovery that the government had turned over to us for trial. So we were pretty busy, obviously, at that point in time with trial, also trying to support Eric while he was on hunger strike, trying to get vegan food at the Sacramento County Main Jail. And so we just didn't really have time to follow through on that or pursue it, even though we knew that they clearly did have records responsive to our request. So after Eric was convicted and sentenced in 2008, we filed another Freedom of Information Act request, and about a year and a half later, we started finally receiving records that were responsive to that request. And at that time, we received 3 or 4 different packages of documents equaling about 2,500 pages. One other interesting thing about that, though, is that the government admitted to not handing over almost 900 more pages of information, and we still haven't seen those documents. We still don't know what's in those documents, and perhaps, unfortunately, never will.
Eric McDavid, can you talk about your reaction when you discovered that this Anna, the informant, was an informant and had been taping conversations, the very person who was trying to instigate activity among you and other activists, and your reaction to her testimony in court?
Well, initially, to your first question, it was as I was sitting on the back of the car and I heard the locks click all the way around on the automatic lock of the vehicle that she was sitting in while she was talking on the phone, as about 8 to 10 different vehicles pulled screeching up in front of me with JTTF hopping out, AR-15s, everybody all ready to roll. So I mean, that was the first one it clicked. So it wasn't. I had a whole bunch on my mind at the time, so it wasn't really a predominant or a huge thought. During trial, that part, because I'd read a whole bunch of the discovery and we'd gone over transcripts and everything, and it was difficult to see, definitely, but I don't know, it was definitely hard to see. I mean, that part was definitely one of the more harder rides of the whole trial.
This is an excerpt. I wanted to go to an excerpt of an exchange between, well, the woman who calls herself Anna. And for folks who are listening on the radio, we're also showing pictures of her. She was featured, as we said, in Elle magazine. The exchange between Anna and Eric McDavid and another activist, Lauren Weiner, when they were in the cabin allegedly planning to bomb the Nimbus Dam. Anna says, tomorrow, what are we planning on doing tomorrow? Are we still planning on doing anything tomorrow, or should I just stop talking about plans? Eric McDavid says, Weiner says, I would love it if you stopped talking. Anna says, I would love it if you guys followed a plan. How about that? Ben Rosenfeld, what is the significance of this back and forth?
The significance of that back and forth is that it really illustrates 100% a case of egregious and grotesque entrapment by the government. Anna literally called them names and threw fits when they didn't show enough enthusiasm for her plans, and I think that excerpt illustrates that perfectly. And I would also point out that right now the government wants to skate away on the claim that this was purely a mistake or inadvertent on the back of a press office statement. And whether it was a mistake or it was malfeasance or it was malevolence to withhold these documents, they really owe it to Eric and they owe it to the public to come up with a much more detailed explanation about how this could have happened. I mean, the deck is completely stacked in their favor. I mean, the job of the defense, in essence, is to go fishing in their deck to ask, do you have anything? And if you're told they don't have anything, you're stuck with that answer, and sometimes for a long time and sometimes forever. In Eric's case, for 9 years of wrongful incarceration.
But, Ben, in this situation where prosecutors clearly deliberately withhold evidence, possibly exculpatory evidence, I've seen so many of these cases over the years. Isn't it the responsibility to some degree of the judge to insist that an investigation be conducted because the trial itself was so tainted as a result of these actions of the prosecutors?
We'd certainly like to see the judge do that. We'd like to see the judiciary take that up. And there's some indications by Ninth Circuit judges that they are very concerned about a potential epidemic of Brady violations. Brady is the Supreme Court case that speaks to the withholding of documents. I would point out, too, that from a legal standpoint, it doesn't matter whether it was inadvertent or deliberate. If they withheld documents which were helpful to the defense, in this case, documents showing that there was romantic interest by Eric, a correspondence between Eric and Anna that the prosecutors held back, and a reciprocation by Anna, that's good enough to satisfy that constitutional standard and to win release. It should be, but it's very rare that it happens, and you can see that it takes years and years and years to correct a mistake which should have been corrected a long time ago, and there are a lot of people behind bars who may never get that chance.
The 2008 Elle article about the Eric McDavid case quotes a juror named Diane Bennett, who was tracked down by the reporter after the trial. Bennett said, quote, "I've been bothered by this ever since that day. The FBI was an embarrassment. I hope he gets a new trial. I'm not happy with the one he got." Diane Bennett added the foreman had teared up when he delivered the guilty verdict. She said the judge's instructions were confusing, but, quote, "people were tired. We wanted to go home." Can you talk about the significance of this, Ben Rosenfeld?
Well, and she said that so long ago, and it just goes to show how long you can live in this Kafkaesque nightmare where the government has engaged in total misconduct, and the court perhaps has abdicated a responsibility to oversee this, or maybe is hoodwinked along with the defense because of the overly trusting role and excessive trust that it places sometimes in the government and the prosecutor. I mean, in court on January 8th, the day that Eric walked free, I've never seen so many fireworks. And the judge really grilled the prosecutors, and he showed a lot of personal pique and interest in getting to the bottom of this, and I really hope that he or somebody does follow up.
Could you explain the deal that was struck at the end, though?
Yeah, Eric had to plead to a simple or general conspiracy count with a maximum penalty of 5 years. The judge vacated the original conviction and sentence of 20 years on a different charge. So the government extracts its pound of flesh. That's probably as much justice as you're going to get out of the Department of Injustice in a case like this. Eric had to waive all civil claims going forward. But he's here now, and we're extremely grateful for that and for everybody that made that possible. And I will say to the team of U.S. attorneys at the end of the case who behaved extremely honorably and professionally in taking a fresh look at this and enabling that to happen too. But it took a collaboration of a lot of people to end this nightmare. And there are a lot of people left in prison who are the victims of this kind of government malfeasance also, and there needs to be an inquiry.
And Eric, could you talk in about a minute and a half we have left of your time in prison? Did you expect at some point to be able to get out and to have this nightmare behind you?
I had a buddy at the medium security prison where I was first held, who always challenged me in keeping my mind open and keeping my heart open and making sure that I was ready for anything. And given the intensity of that environment, it definitely helped me to adapt to that whole situation. But he was always, every other week or every other day, he'd hit me up. You ready to go home? You ready to go home? I'm like, yes, I'm ready to go home. He's like, all right, so here's the situation. How you're going to go home? Tell me how you're going to do it. And so that part was always kept alive. And the amount of support that I got from folks has just, it's blown my heart open every day and every moment that I was away from my friends and family and my loved ones.
Did you meet other people behind bars who you felt were entrapped like you were?
There is so many people that either are entrapped in the same way or are pressured into taking a sentence because they're threatened with 60, 70 years of prison, and they have to do the 15 or they have to do the 17 or even 20 because otherwise they're going to spend the rest of their life back there.
Well, Eric
McDavid,
we want to thank you for being with us. Congratulations on your release. He was released from prison Thursday, less than a week after federal prosecutors withheld key evidence in the 2008 trial that led to his conviction on eco-terrorism charges. Jenny Esquivel, member of the Sacramento Prisoner Support, also Eric McDavid's partner. And thanks to Ben Rosenfeld, joining us from San Francisco, the civil rights attorney who specializes in cases dealing with police and FBI misconduct, the attorney for Eric McDavid. That does it for the broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltzer, and Mate Nermit Shakespeare.